Namaskar. I would like to welcome everybody to this teachers training program for the primary level organized by School Education Department, Government of West Bengal Samagro Shiksha Mission, West Bengal Board of Primary Education and Expert Committee on School Education. I have with me Dr. Dhiman Basu,
Namaskar.
Mr. Masood Akhtar, and I am Rudranil Ghosh. All three of us represent Expert Committee on School Education, Government of West Bengal. Today we will discuss the different aspects of our environment for the primary level. As we all know that the name of the subject is our environment. Dhimanda, could you please tell us or explain why the name our environment?
Yes, you have raised an important question. The importance of including environment in any curriculum is this. Today we can see the impact of pollution and habitat loss on environment and the loss of biodiversity. So, with that in our mind, we would like to include the components of environment in any curriculum that we are going to design for young learners. This is the first step. There is another reason for including environment in our curriculum. We know that when a child begins his or her journey towards knowledge, he or she draws upon his experiences and interactions with the immediate surroundings. The surroundings gives him or her the important components which he or she uses as a tool to probe the workings of environment and also the physical world in general. So, it is very important to recognize that fact and include components of environment in our curriculum and in classroom teaching. I will give you one example to prove my point. Once a child aged about 4.5 years told me that he had discovered a very interesting thing. When I asked about it, he said that he discovered that heat cannot be confined to a particular place. I was rather interested in it and I said, how do you arrive at such a conclusion? He said that on cold winter nights when he returned to his bed, he found that his warm pillows had cooled down a lot. From this he constructed the knowledge like this, that heat cannot be stored in a place, it dissipates. Now, in this particular case, following these observation, he has reached the correct scientifically accepted conclusion, but I hasten to add that in each and every such case, a child may not be able to reach the scientifically accepted conclusion. However, there will be facilitators who will help him or her in this journey. So, by including environment, we are actually recognizing the fact that environment gives the child the impetus and the components upon which he or she builds the knowledge. So, this is the prime importance why one should include environment in one's curriculum. Rudra, today people talk about child centric curriculum. What are the reasons that a child's experience is given importance in such a curriculum?
Yes, indeed, child's experiences are given much importance in the learning process as a whole. Obviously, there are certain reasons for developing a child centric curriculum. First of all, I would like to refer to National Curriculum Framework 2005 or NCF 2005, which is a very important document in the sphere of education. NCF says child-centered pedagogy means giving primacy to child's experiences, their voices and their active participation. What does this mean? NCF tells us to place the child's experiences at a central position in the overall learning process. Secondly, I would like to mention constructivism or constructivist approach. The basic premise of a constructivist approach or constructivism is to give utmost importance to child's experiences. According to constructivism, a child actively creates new knowledge based on his or her past and present experiences, and also by reflecting on those experiences. According to constructivism, the student advances the classroom transaction process on his or her own by creating new knowledge from his or her experiences, and the teacher acts as a facilitator and help the students in their endeavor. Now, let us take an example. Suppose there is a child who has just got promoted to class 4. Until now, he had known that the animals who crawl on their bellies have no backbone. But in class 4, in the first chapter, he encounters the fact that though the snake crawls on their bellies, they do have a backbone. So, their prior knowledge is being challenged or is being questioned. So, what will happen now? Based on his or her present experiences, the student will modify his prior knowledge, and the teacher will act as a facilitator while the child is creating the new knowledge. Thirdly, I would like to talk about the Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act 2009 or RTE Act 2009, which tells us that learning should occur through discovery, exploration and activities in a child friendly and child centric manner. So, from these 3 cases that I have discussed until now, we can see very well that the child has been placed at the central position in the overall learning process. For this reason, in the textbooks of our environment for the primary level, we have tried to expose the students to various new experiences through various activities in different chapters of our environment textbooks. This will help to raise certain questions regarding their prior knowledge. Ultimately, this will culminate in knowledge creation.
Rudrada, we find different aspects of science, history, geography, environment and social studies have been incorporated in an integrated manner in the textbook Our Environment. Why this is so?
True. Different components of science, history, geography, environment and social studies have been incorporated in an integrated manner and presented to the students in the textbooks of our environment. Now, there are certain reasons for this. Before going to the reasons, let me first explain or let me first start with an example. Suppose a child sees a bird. The child asks his or her father, what is the name of that bird? The father tells the child the name of the bird. But the child's mind is full of questions. So, the child's next question is, Father, why I haven't seen this bird before? The father answers, you haven't seen this bird before because this bird comes from some other country to our country in winter. Basically, this bird is a winter visitor, or we can call this type of bird migratory birds. The child then asks another question. Father, did you see this type of bird in your childhood? The father may answer in the affirmative or in the negative. But look, These three seemingly unrelated questions asked by the child have breached the boundaries of three different subject areas. Actually, the child does not have any idea about subject boundaries. All he wants is to create knowledge from his or her experiences. We find support in this regard in the executive summary of NCF 2005, which tells us this NCF recommends softening the subject boundaries so that the child can get a taste of integrated knowledge and the joy of understanding. So, the NCF tells us to present the knowledge in an integrated manner to the child and not in a compartmentalized way. This NCF also tells us not to burden the child with abstract subject boundaries. This will help the child to feel the joy of understanding. This is just what we have done in the textbooks of our environment. We have incorporated different components from science, history, geography, environment and social studies. But one thing should be kept in mind. These textbooks of our environment are not textbooks of science. Similarly, these textbooks are not textbooks of geography or history either. Now, let us take three examples. First of all, I would like to refer to a section from class 3, where there is a discussion regarding the houses built in flood prone areas and the houses built in earthquake prone zones. In the discussion regarding the houses in the flood prone areas, it has been mentioned that the houses are to be built on some high pillars or on the top of some pillars. And in the discussion regarding the earthquake prone zones, it has been mentioned that the houses are to be built of wood, or the houses are to be wooden houses instead of brick and cement houses. So, we can see that human experience differs with a change in place. From this, the students will acquire a sense of space. Now, coming to the second example. While discussing different components from history, we have consciously avoided the traditional practice of date, year and information based discussion. Let us take an example. In class 4, in a chapter called Human Experiences with Nature, a discussion is there on the uses of stones or uses of metals by ancient people. Again in class 5, in a discussion on the river valley civilizations, a reference or a mention has been made about the remains of King Chandraketu's fortress near Vidyadhari river. In connection with this, a passing reference has been made to Harappan civilization, another river valley civilization. But in both these cases, there was no mention or no discussion about the time periods of these civilizations. So, it is expected that while discussing different components of history, the students will acquire a sense of time. It is also expected that the students will know about the history of their locality first, then they will know about the history of other regions. For this reason, first of all, they get to know about the river valley civilizations near them, then they, afterwards they will know about other river valley civilizations. Likewise, if we take another example from science, there is a discussion in class 4 where water droplets were seen to have formed or seen to have accumulated on the surface of a glass filled with ice. Now, what is the reason behind this phenomenon? The students are presented with a logical scientific reasoning for their observation, but the science as such has not been taught. What is expected is this: while discussing different components of science, the students will develop a scientific temper. So, we can conclude this discussion by saying that we have not strived to teach science, history, geography, environment and social studies as separate disciplines, but what we have tried is this: to help the student in creating new knowledge from his or her experiences, from his or her surroundings. For this reason, the textbooks of our environment have different components from science, history, geography, environment and social studies, and they are presented in an integrated manner to the students.
Dimanda, how has the integration of different subjects been achieved in curriculum and textbook of our environment?
Thank you, Masood, for giving me this opportunity to explain my point of view about it. Rudranil has already elaborated upon the issue. I will elaborate it further. The basic philosophy behind our textbooks is this: we have kept the subject boundaries between different knowledge areas as fuzzy as we could. We have placed more emphasis upon the concepts than on the areas. So, accordingly we have embedded those concepts and experiences in our curriculum, especially in the themes that have been discussed in our textbooks. And there, suppose someone discusses a topic about geography, he or she, I mean the instructor speaks about certain things about geography, but he or she never mentions that he or she is teaching geography to the learners. More important for the learners is to master the essence of it rather than knowing which subject he or she is being taught. This is of much importance in our curriculum. To illustrate my point, I will show you a table that correlates the themes in our textbook for class 5, that is our environment, with the embedded subject areas. In this table, the left hand column mentions the specific themes and the right hand column mentions the embedded subject areas. Now, I will explain on these things first, and then now let us look at the second entry in the first column. The second entry is the theme called plants, animals and conservation of biodiversity. Now, what are the embedded subject areas in this theme? In this theme, we have embedded biology, environmental science and social science. Now, let us come to the third theme, which is natural components of environment and their uses. In this theme, there are elements from geography, physics, chemistry, biology and environmental science. Now, if we move to the 10th theme, which is human achievements, we shall notice that there are elements from history, geography, social science and environmental science. So, this table attempts to make it clear to the teacher, I mean the instructor, about the basic philosophy of our book. Now, one point is very important: this table should not be reproduced in a classroom situation. These themes and the embedded subject areas should not be disclosed to the students, because it is not meant for them, it is meant for us, I mean the instructors. Actually, it is a sad fact that we have been nurtured upon the conventional or traditional curriculum, which always attempts to demarcate the specific subject areas in the first place. However, our philosophy behind making these books differs from the traditional one in an important aspect. We are going to teach the students, the learners, about the concepts, but we are not to emphasize which subject areas they belong to. When we are giving general description of West Bengal, we shall describe certain preliminary things about topography of West Bengal, rivers and other things, but we are not going to mention that this is geography and that is biology, that is physics or that is chemistry. This is the basic idea about making these books. Let us look at a schematic diagram which is composed of several concentric circles. In the smallest circle, we have placed an important concept, which is coal in this particular case. Coal has been introduced in class 5, and here we have shown coal as the key concept or central concept here, and this is followed by some general questions about coal, like what purpose does it serve in our life, is the smoke obtained from coal harmful to us, like that. Now, while answering these simple questions, the teacher takes the students to a state where they are able to grasp certain core concepts. What are the core concepts? The core concept in this first case is this, that coal is an important economic source. Coal is our principal fuel for generating electricity. So, when the student masters this concept, he unknowingly touches subject areas like environmental science, social science and geography. Similarly, by acquiring core concepts shown in other sectors of the schematic diagram, he or she will be able to touch other subject areas like chemistry, biology, economics and social science. So, this is the basic idea about the organization of the curriculum. Now, once again I reiterate that this diagram is not to be presented in a classroom. It is for us to appreciate the basic philosophy that worked between developing these textbooks. Now, I will show you another such schematic diagram where the central concept or the key concept or the central theme is fish. The first question here that has been raised is, which fishes are familiar to you? Following this cue, the learners ultimately acquire two important core concepts. The first one is, fish is one of our major food, and the second one is, fish is a major economic produce, and unknowingly touch areas like biology, pisciculture and geography. The next question is, where do you get fish from? Ultimately, it leads to the core concepts related with diversity of fish, their specific characteristics and their commercial production. This journey leads them to the subject areas like biology, chemistry, pisciculture, ecology, geography and economics. Now, what do the arrows indicate? The curved arrows in this diagram indicate the logical sequence of questions, and the straight arrows indicate the journey of the student, beginning with the central concept and finally touching the subject areas. Rudranil, nowadays any discussion on curricula and syllabi includes expected learning outcomes. So, would you please tell us something about the learning outcomes and why they are so important in the learning process itself?
Yes, Dimanda, the learning outcomes are very relevant in today's educational scenario. A basic change had occurred in the educational sphere when the child's ability in knowledge creation was acknowledged. As a result of which, the child's experiences was placed at the center of the learning process. And we all know that knowledge creation is a continuous process. So, the basic focus now is on the learning process. As a result, there is a shift from the concept of knowledge as a product to the concept of knowledge as a process. For this reason, the cognitive process has become much more important. Since the learning process has come into focus, so what the student will know or be able to do at the end of a learning process has become very important. This is expressed with the help of expected learning outcome statements. Now, let us define what is a learning outcome. Learning outcomes are statements that specify what a learner will know or be able to do at the end of a learning activity or as a result of a learning activity. Now, let us go to the board to see how to write a learning outcome statement or how a learning outcome statement looks like. We know what is a learning outcome. Now, let us find out how to write a learning outcome. In the board, we have a general statement for the learning outcome. Learners will be able to do what? Within parenthesis, how. Now, let us take a specific learning outcome. We have taken a learning outcome from class 4 from chapter Elements of Environment, the World of Living Beings. The learners will be able to differentiate living organisms from non-living objects. So, here what the learners will be able to do between living organisms and non-living objects. They will be able to differentiate. Differentiate represents an action. So, differentiate is an action verb, just like the do in the general statement. Now, let us take another example. We have taken this learning outcome from class 3, the chapter name is houses. The learners will be able to make pictorial representation of the different structural elements of a house and its surroundings using signs and symbols. Now, let us at first forget about this last part, using signs and symbols. So, what the learners will be able to do? They will be able to make pictorial representation. So, here the make is the action verb. Now, coming to the extra part, that is using signs and symbols. We have already seen that in the general statement for the learning outcome, we have a how within the parenthesis. Why given in the parenthesis? Because not every time this last part will be there in the expected learning outcome statements, like using signs and symbols, using maps or with the help of diagrams, but sometimes they may be present. So, now we know how a learning outcome statement looks like. Now, let us discuss two things. The first, the learning outcome or the expected learning outcome statements should always be expressed as a complete meaningful sentence. I repeat, as a complete meaningful sentence. And number two, the expected learning outcomes should always be observable and measurable. Let me illustrate this with an example. Let us take another learning outcome from class 4. The learners will be able to understand the process of digestion of food in human body. Now, the action verb here is understand. Can we measure or observe understand? I think not. If we can change this action verb understand with say describe or explain. So, now the expected learning outcome statement looks like the learners will be able to describe the process of digestion of food in human body. Now, if we can design an activity or a sample question, then we can easily measure whether the learners have achieved this learning outcome in formative evaluation and in summative evaluation. Until now, we have discussed about some action verbs like differentiate, make and then describe. Let me tell you some other action verbs. There are many action verbs, but I will just mention a few. They may be explain, describe, draw, label, list, compare, etc. Now, there was another question asked by Dhimanda: how do the learning outcomes help in the learning process? Now, let us take this learning outcome, the first one, as an example. The learners will be able to differentiate living organisms from non-living objects. If we can design a specific activity based on this learning outcome, like the one given here, list non-living objects and living organisms that can be seen around you, and in the table there is a column non-living objects and another column living organisms. So, now if we can give this activity to the students, and after that we can see or find out which students were able to do this activity, then we can easily tell that those students have definitely achieved this learning outcome. Similarly, we can set a question based on this learning outcome for summative evaluation, as given here. Write two differences between non-living objects and living organisms. The same here, if we can find out the students who have successfully given answer to this question, we can say that those students have definitely achieved this learning outcome. So, from this discussion we can see that both the learning process and evaluation are dependent on expected learning outcomes.
Thank you, Rudranil, for a lucid explanation of the term learning outcomes. Now, would you please tell us how to link these learning outcomes with classroom transactions and also with the formative and summative evaluation processes?
Both the formative and summative evaluation are very important in framing a proper plan for an effective classroom transaction process, because it is only with the help of a proper plan for a classroom transaction process the students will be able to achieve the expected learning outcomes, and the learner's level of achievement can be measured through formative and summative evaluation. Now, we can see in the presentation there is a schematic diagram. The schematic diagram depicts how, with the help of a proper plan for an effective classroom transaction process, the expected learning outcomes that the students have achieved can be measured with the help of or through formative and summative evaluation. In this regard, one thing is very important, that is devising innovative classroom transaction process, because this innovative classroom transaction process will help the students to achieve the expected learning outcomes. Now, there are two things that should be kept in mind. First of all, the learning process and the evaluation are not to be seen as two separate events, and number two, evaluation is a continuous process. For this reason, the teacher measures the ability of the learners while the classroom transaction process is going on. This is formative evaluation. In formative evaluation, we take help of 5 indicators, namely participation, questioning and experimentation, interpretation and application, empathy and cooperation, aesthetic and creative expression. Each of these 5 indicators has 4 rubrics, with the help of which the teachers evaluates the students in formative evaluation. Now, we know another thing, that in the classroom the transaction process moves on with the help of different activities. Now, we can develop or design an activity based on a specific expected learning outcome. Based on the students' responses, we can measure how far the students have achieved the expected learning outcomes. At the same time, the teacher can do the formative evaluation with the help of 5 indicators and the rubrics. So, we can see that while the classroom transaction process is going on, both the formative evaluation and the evaluation of the learners regarding their achievement of expected learning outcomes can be done simultaneously. Likewise, in summative evaluation, we can also set questions based on expected learning outcomes. Based on the students' responses, we can judge how far the students have achieved to reach the expected learning outcome. From this discussion, we see that the expected learning outcomes have been placed at a central position in the learning process, or we can say that the learning process is driven by expected learning outcomes. Again, if we see the presentation, the schematic diagram also shows us that a convergence occurs between expected learning outcomes and evaluation, both formative and summative. Masood, how can the learning process be guided in a proper manner in the classroom situation? Could you please explain?
Thank you, Rudraja. There are so many methods or models for classroom transaction, such as icon model, 5E model, but it depends on teacher, or it's upon his freedom to choose. I choose a topic from the textbook Our Environment of class 3, that is Under the Open Sky, from the unit Houses. From this topic, expected learning outcomes are: learners will be able to discuss on the evolution of human shelters. They can make list of different animal shelters. 5E model has 5 phases. First phase is engagement phase, second phase is exploration phase, third phase is explanation phase, fourth phase is elaboration phase, and fifth phase is evaluation phase. In the first phase, learners are engaged in variety of discussions and in various activities. It helps to arouse their curiosity for the topic. Their previous knowledge helps them very much in this phase. They can correlate their prior experience with new. The question for the discussion may be, why did people make houses to live? Why do you find different houses in different areas or regions? What are the problems to live under the open sky? Or do you find any similarity or differences between your house and the houses portrayed on your textbook? In this phase, teachers can measure indicators like participation and questioning and experimentation. Second phase is exploration. In this phase, learners will work in groups through mutual cooperation. Teacher will help them as facilitator. They will provide necessary information to the learners. Learners urged to explore helps them to construct knowledge. For example, what are the advantages and disadvantages to live near the seaside? Or wooden house or brick made house? What kind of house is more preferable in the earthquake prone areas? In this phase, teachers can measure indicators like questioning and experimentation, interpretation and application. Third phase is explanation phase. In this stage, learner will explain to the class what they have learned through exploration. This discussion can be within the learners or in between the learners and the teachers. Through this discussion, learners apply their acquired concept with different activities. For example, why nomadic people decide to settle permanently. In this phase, teachers can measure indicators like interpretation and application, questioning and experimentation. Fourth phase is elaboration phase. In this stage, learner will extend their concepts and they will be able to correlate with other concepts. For example, the students will develop concepts on different animals' habitats by discussing field rats' nest, ants' nest, termite hill, etc. In this phase, teachers can measure indicators like interpretation and application, questioning and experimentation, empathy and cooperation. Fifth and final phase is evaluation. This is an ongoing process. In this stage, teacher tries to find out whether learners are able to construct knowledge. However, it is to be noted, evaluation can be done at any stage of knowledge construction. Besides various kinds of evaluation, tools can be applied for assessing the learners. Teachers can evaluate learners through various activities. For example, we can give them activity like write how different animals make their nest in the table below. Here we can see in this table there are two columns. In the left column there are few names of animal, bird and insects. In the right column, learner will write how different animals make their nest. Through this activity, teacher can evaluate learners by 3 indicators for evaluation. First one is participation, second indicator is questioning and experimentation, and third one is interpretation and application. Through this procedure, learners will be able to reach their expected learning outcomes. For this unit, learning outcomes are discuss evolution of shelters of human. Second one is list shelter of animals. Not only formative evaluation, but also through the summative evaluation, teachers can assess whether learners have achieved learning outcomes or not. For example, we can see a sample question for summative evaluation, that is, why did primitive men change their habitat frequently? Through this activity also, learners will be able to achieve these learning outcomes. So we can say in conclusion that expected learning outcomes, formative evaluation and summative evaluation are related to each other. If learning process be done in an planned manner, then expected learning outcomes are easy to achieve.
Thank you, Dhimanda. Thank you, Masood. So with this, we conclude today's discussion on our environment for the primary level. Thank you.